The true story of the plane crash survivors that had to eat their own dead friends to survive has been made into a Netflix movie. On October 13th, 1972, the pilot's error while flying over the Andes Mountains caused the plane to scrape against the mountaintop. The wings and tail were ripped off while the passengers held on to dear life. One survivor described gripping his plane seat so hard that his fingers went through the cotton of the seat. Another passenger screamed, "I can't see," and he turned around to see that his skull had been cracked open and his brain was spilling out through his head. While the violent crash killed many, 33 survived, and they were stuck in the snowy wilderness with no food, no water, snow but no water, and very little survival supplies. They used their seats to patch up the broken fuselage to use as a shelter. They would lay out snow on sheets of metal so that the sun would heat it up and melt it so they could drink water. And in terms of food, they only had the snacks from the plane. But this was so high in the mountains, there were no plants or animals to eat. And they came to the realization that the only food around was inside the bodies of their dead friends. And they eventually decided that if they wanted to survive, they would need to cut into the bodies of the dead. This was no easy task because of the emotional barrier, and they had no way to cook the meat. And the survivors made a pact that if they were to perish, they would want the others to eat their bodies. As if things couldn't get worse, about 2 weeks in, there was an avalanche. It killed an additional 8 people and trapped them inside their shelter. When they were finally able to dig their way out, they realized that a few of them would need to venture into the mountains to try to find a way out. Many of the survivors were professional rugby teams, so luckily they were very physically fit. 3 of them started their trek through the mountainside, but they realized that they were much further into the wilderness than they initially thought. So one headed back so that the 2 would be able to preserve their food rations, the food being human flesh they were storing in socks. But after 10 days, they came across a farmer who went to get help. And after 72 days, the survivors were saved. While most called it a miracle, others became angry when they found out the survivors committed cannibalism. And these people who for weeks didn't know if they'd ever get to see their family or civilization again, were faced with becoming pariahs. Roberto Canessa, who had been serving as the group doctor since he was a medical student, and I think he was also kind of like their leader, made it his mission to set out and meet the deceased parents. And thankfully, the families were understanding that this was a dire situation. There was literally nothing else they could have done to survive. And luckily, the church and everyone else followed suit. And honestly, to anyone who criticizes them, I say grow up. This was a life or death situation, and you are in no place to judge somebody when you have barely experienced even like a fraction of what they were experiencing out in those mountains. The filmmakers worked directly with the survivors to make sure that their storytelling was accurate and respectful. And it was actually the first time a fictionalization of this story was allowed to use the actual passengers' names. In fact, they even went up to the site of the plane crash to film. This harrowing story is retold in Society of the Snow, a Spanish-language film on Netflix now.